Now we'll be answering you guys' questions. So if you do have any more questions, please submit them via Slido, SLIDO. And our code is YP2019. So our first question is for Suhaib. If an ideal does not align with one of our core principles, do we stop there or do we try to line it up with a hadith? If an idea does not align with one of the core principles of our own, do we stop there or do we try to line it up with a hadith?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Rasul. Thank you, that was nice. You were dropping bars, mashallah. So the question, and I think there needs to be clarification, the question was, if an idea that we have doesn't align with the principle, then should we find a hadith to support it? Well, you can't, because a hadith is a principle. So we're talking about principles, and when Ahmed Zarruq, this is a great question, by the way, when Ahmed Zarruq was talking about isnad wa shay li asli, yani isnad wa shay lil Quran wa sunnah. What he meant is, like, any idea, any notion that you have to root that in the Quran or in the hadith. So obviously, if an idea, and this needs some nuance, but generally doesn't agree with the foundations of the Quran and Sunnah, then we should reject the idea. And that's why Allah says, وَمَا آتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُ. Whatever the Prophet commanded you, do it. Whatever the Prophet told you to stay away from, stay away from. Wallahu a'lam.
What advice would you give to young women in terms of choosing a career and balancing it with dreams of excelling in Islamic learning? The question again was, what advice would you give young women in terms of choosing a career and balancing it with dreams of excelling in Islamic learning?
Okay, so the question, for the sake of those who can't hear from that mic, is how do you go about excelling in your career, but also balancing that with Islamic learning? Is that right? Okay. SubhanAllah, these things, it can certainly be challenging when we kind of do exist in a structure where they're separated. There's like secular knowledge and there's religious knowledge. You go to church on Sunday and then you live, your life other days. But I would say that these things can be in conversation. So no matter what discipline you're in, you would be amazed to find some of the scholarship that exists from an Islamic tradition that comments on that discipline. And certainly it's not advanced to where we need it to be now, and inshallah that's the task that we all need to kind of put upon ourselves. But to see, if you're in medicine, perhaps to see the fascination of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the body and whatnot, and that driving, inshallah, a passion for religious knowledge, to always have that be in tandem. Whether it's finding a teacher, an undergrad that can mentor you, or as a young adult, finding a halaqah, but always making time for that somehow so that they can be in conversation, and taking, the intellectual pursuit of knowledge through university or school or whatever it is to be a spiritual experience itself. That when we renew our intentions, inshallah, that in enlightening us, makes us better Muslims, makes us connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more, makes us appreciate the universe and the world around us. So in a practical sense, I would say always having those two things be a part of your schedule, and it really is a matter of intentionality and recognizing in yourself that you're going to make that deliberate effort to make the time for both things, because really neither thing, in my view, can be excelled at without the other.
Our next question is, my MSA is super strict, which is pushing new Muslim college students away. What can I, one student, do to make my MSA more inclusive than exclusive?
So there's definitely a wave, even in this country, of MSAs kind of becoming more, I'm not going to use the term, so I'm going to say literalist. Yeah, I'm going to say Salafi. Should I say Salafi? And that, unfortunately, sometimes, our experience with religion depending on the depth of our understanding of it, we can try to kind of propagate it in a way that's, no, this ayah says this, so that means this is haram, and this other thing is haram, and we can't have this, and astaghfirullah, that brother, he walked with a girl that time, he's a bad role model, he can't be a part of our MSA. Or this person, may identify in some way that's not traditional for us, so they can't pray in our musalla. We hear this, right? My MSA had these challenges too. And it's extremely important for us to remember there's the literal of the text, right? There's, okay, what we know to be the Quran, what we know to be right and wrong. But then there's the example of the Prophet ﷺ. So what I found to be an incredibly useful tool when engaging with some of the folks who were either way too strict or even way too liberal was to bring up the examples of the Prophet ﷺ. How would the Prophet ﷺ handle this situation? Bringing specific stories from his life that are undeniable. At that point, the people, especially the people who are trying to be really strict, what are they going to say when they know that the Prophet ﷺ accommodated XYZ types of people in his masjid? What are they going to say when they know, our masajid going to be places where we bring folks and heal all of our hearts and make it a place where we can grow? Or are they going to be a place where we exclude everybody, right? And the examples of the Prophet ﷺ are there. We know of the man who, urinated. We know of the Sahaba who intoxicated, had girlfriends and whatnot, committed zina, like the most absurd things we can imagine, but had a haven in the Prophet ﷺ's masjid. These are stories that we can bring forward, I think, to challenge the folks who, grow those beards and have their thobe up and whatever, and try to be really literalist about things in an exclusive way that doesn't manifest that spirit. And sometimes, working with them with compassion too, because maybe they're coming from a place where they fear the preservation of the deen. If we don't stick to the word, we're going to lose the deen. And there's something to appreciate there. But as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually said in verses to the Prophet ﷺ himself, إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا جَمْعَهُ وَقُرْآنَهُ فَإِذَا قَرْأَنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ ثُمَّ إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا بَيَانَهُ. At the end of the day, the deen is protected. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect that deen. And it's not necessarily our duty to feel that burden in a way that channels anger and strictness to people. But when we do have that compassion, and again, stick to the example of the Prophet ﷺ, we ultimately find clarity in how to exhibit that kind of behavior.
Just 1 second, sorry. I'll speak to the convert part of it. I told her I haven't been at MSA in 25 years. It's been a while. But as a convert, I can say that there's three things that we need to appreciate. Number one, and this is even for not converts, Islam is baked, it's not microwaved. And sometimes there is a subtle sickness in the heart that I want to live vicariously through other people's religious growth. So that's a lack of ikhlas. So now I am finding my value in this new convert who is now becoming me, or doing what I've told him to do. And I'm going to be honest with you, that is a very destructive relationship. That's spiritual abuse, right? In a more benign form. The second thing is that converts should be leading convert efforts. So for example, at NYU, where I teach, the greatest school in the world, mashallah, we have a convert program which is ran by converts. And the funny thing is, people will say, well, the converts don't know much about deen. How much do you know about deen? Right, so again, it gets back to a disease of the heart where now if you've learned, then that's different. Someone that's learned is never going to say, they're not going to have that attitude. They're going to have the attitude of like, let's work together, right? Because a learned person realizes they need to learn from the learner, right? There's this reciprocal relationship. So the second thing is that if you're really about it, then step out of the way and let converts run convert issues. The third thing, and this goes also to the question about, managing kind of, if you don't mind, I'm going to add to that, professional career. Everyone here who's in these spaces, you need a sheikh. You don't need Sheikh YouTube. Because Sheikh YouTube is good for Sheikh YouTube is like milh ala ta'am, right? Salt on the food. Like I go to Sheikh YouTube to get a little here and there, but it's very hard to find a Sunni who's gone through one basic text of Sunni theology. Or as you compare, let's say, the Catholic Church, the Shia community, the Jewish community, their young people are, and their old people are educated. So the third is that you want to have a teacher, but that teacher needs to have the following qualities. Number one, they're a teacher, they're not a dictator. You're not joining a cult, you're just learning. And I said the great example is tech support. Like, the sheikh is like tech support, man. Right? I learn, but then like from time to time I need to hit you up because like I got questions. This convert's like whatever's going on in the community. Can you help me root this idea? That idea that I talked about in the beginning of rooting things. That's where the scholar plays the role to help you attach, to tether. Because religious language, whether it's on the left, which is stepped in kind of this, lack of identity of truth, but also the problem of conservatism in America is that's steeped in white supremacy, right? And if the left wants to kill us intellectually, the right wants to kill us physically. So there's a challenge. So how do I navigate that, right? One puts poison in my Frappuccino and smiles at me while we listen to Yuna in some hip neoliberal place where we're all like wearing like, hemp-made t-shirts and like used shoes and we're worried about climate change, but we're bombing Yemen, right? Or on the other side, it's like, I'm gonna bomb you because white is right. So I need the sheikh. So you want to have a teacher. The teacher should not be a dictator. Number two, you should not be joining a cult. You should not be in a group of people. It's like 5 of them and they're like, we're the saved Muslims. Really? 5 of you? You must be horrible if you can only save 5 people. That's a bad investment. And number 3 is they need to realize that they don't have the right to destroy your unique personality. So that question about converts is important. We need to step back and allow converts to lead convert efforts and not assume that, oh, I know more. I mean, if you go to study circles, who's usually in the front row is who? Is the converts. So having that idea is dangerous. And then at an MSA level, finally, I will say this. An MSA's job is not to negotiate orthodoxy. An MSA's job is to provide a religious and social setting for Muslims to stay in touch with their deen. You don't have to come in and be Sheikh al-Islam MSAiyya. Just be someone who facilitates people's religious growth because, as I said and I finish, religion is baked, it's not microwaved.
Another question about identity. So often we question whether we can work with certain groups because of our Muslim identity. Isn't it incorrect to assume that those identities are mutually exclusive? Yes. Often we question whether we can work with certain groups because of our Muslim identity. Isn't it incorrect to assume that those identities are mutually exclusive?
Okay, I appreciate this question. It's definitely one worth thinking through, and I don't want to assume that one perspective is wrong necessarily. I think we all have good intentions when we come here and addressing it. The Prophet ﷺ in his society not only maintained relationships with various groups, but gave them chance after chance. If they inclined towards peace, then they did too. If there was an opportunity to work together in a way that promoted tolerance, in a way that promoted justice in the society, he took that opportunity. And that's ultimately our example. Does it mean that we compromise on our own beliefs and values? No. But that starts with a deeper foundation, as I was saying earlier. When we have clarity and understand where we fit contextually, we shouldn't have a problem working with any group. So we can be more specific. Faith groups, that one's easier. We know where we disagree. There are different conversations in the interfaith world as well, that we still have our differences, and we should make that clear, but that we all fall under an umbrella of believing in some kind of divine, that we all believe in the importance of propagating values of justice and equality in a society, and that we believe in putting ourselves on the line to do that. So there's a lot of room there. I imagine this question might be coming relating to something like maybe LGBTQ allyship, right? This is really controversial. The community, I don't think, has found its place fully there, but what I will say is we often focus on allyship with this community, and we forget that there are so many other communities as well that we can be finding allyship with. Whether that's, first of all, intersectionality within our own community. So, like in my political work, I've found some of the most fruitful relationships to be with the Hispanic community, the African American community, even undocumented people whose values and needs align with what I see to be the prophetic mission, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's one thing. So there are many avenues that we haven't explored that we should think about. But even when it comes to the LGBTQ community, we have to be clear on where we stand, and that's a question for each of us internally to tackle. But there's a difference, and I would want to hear from our scholar here more so as well, between working with a community, recognizing that they're marginalized themselves, seeing them for their humanity, because at the end of the day, they're human beings who deserve to be treated with safety and love and compassion, just as any other person should. But that there is a disagreement we have with them, and it's fundamental, and that's what it is. A nuance I want to add to this conversation too is part of perhaps why we find this to be so difficult is not because it's of the practice itself. We're all sinners and we have our things to work on, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us in various ways. And even folks who have those challenges belong in our masjid. But it's this, the fact that it's turned into an identity, right? It's a source of pride, it's a movement, it's a culture now. So I'll tell you how I navigate it politically, and Allahu A'lam, really, this is one of those things that I think requires individual, case-by-case types of guidance that involves a scholar and folks who want to center compassion and look at the Prophet's example and try to find the closest analog. But when it came to policy decisions, right, so we had to have conversations about, there's an advocacy group that's really pushing for gender-neutral bathrooms, locker rooms, things like that. How can we show compassion to a group, but also try to bring about policy outcomes that are good for all of us, including Muslim kids, right, who go to school? So what we tried to do was like, all right, let's have a working group. Let's bring leadership from various faith groups so that it's not just the burden on us. It's not like Muslim against LGBTQ, right? And let's bring leadership from the LGBTQ community, and let's sit down, because you know what? If we don't have this conversation, the changes that we're worried about are going to happen anyway. And how can we think of a third alternative that's not us compromising our values, that's not necessarily marginalizing or oppressing them, but that fits within our understandings and what we view to be acceptable in our deen? So I'll give you, in the practical sense, that could be what? Locker room arrangements where there are stalls and more privacy for everyone. You don't need to have kids changing in front of each other. That's just one, specific example. But I think there are ways that if we have confidence in where we come from on our position in this, we can think of creative alternatives to how to handle these scenarios without cornering ourselves. And the last thing I'll say is we don't have to be apologetic about this either. Sometimes we feel that, when a student group reaches out to us, or when we're asked to sign, add our name to a petition or whatever it is, that, oh my God, how are we going to get out of this? How are we going to address this or deal with it? Different groups and organizations, are going to negotiate things and aren't going to agree with each other on everything, and that's fine. And we have to feel that same sense of entitlement and power to, sign on to the things that uplift human rights for everyone, but also make our position clear when it comes to things that are very explicit and we disagree with. And there's nothing wrong with that. But again, it all stems from a sense of confidence internally on where we stand with that, because then we can engage as human beings and as normal people, rather than kind of freaking out and having this thing where, oh man, like we're not supposed to do this, this is haram, and making it this sensational thing that it doesn't have to be. We actually embolden the whole issue when we do that. So just some thoughts, and inshallah, I'm sure Imam Suhaib has much more wisdom to share.
I don't know if I can add much more to that, mashallah. But I would say this, it's interesting when you look at the Muslim left and the Muslim right, they tend to regurgitate the same concerns of the non-Muslim left and the non-Muslim right. And I find that extremely interesting that, for example, homosexuals in America make up 4% of the population, yet Muslim community tends to talk about homosexuality as though it's like 40 to 50% of the population. And why I say that, I think it's very important that we have our own agenda. We should have our own concerns. We should have our own causes, and we should build and craft our community around our agenda, not simply and that's the interesting thing. I find it strange that, Muslims we kind of have some Nick Cannons in our community, right? Nick Cannon keeps dissing Eminem, hoping that Eminem will respond. We have these guys online who diss Yasser Qadi and diss Omar Soleiman and attack Yasmin Mugahed, and they never respond. So I call these people like the Nick Cannons. And they're firing their cannons, interestingly enough, albeit rather benign. But what's interesting is that when I look at those people, and I say this with respect, their concerns are strictly an exact replica of white evangelicalism. And that's the power of white supremacy. White supremacy functions best when it is subtle and sublime, and you don't notice it. And then I look at the Muslim left, and I have friends on the Muslim left, God bless them all, and on the right. And also their concerns tend to kind of follow whatever is popular. So like, they became more passionate about Muslims when America became more passionate about Muslims. And I was like, this is crazy. That should have been your passion before other people were passionate about it. So one thing I would just put out there as a concern for reflection is, we need to know the needs of our community. There needs to be, as she said, bringing people to the table. There needs to be conversations with people. Like, what is it that we can really do to serve this locality? Not the meta-narrative that's out there saving the world. No, how do I work in, for example, in Ozone Park? How do I serve Inglewood in Chicago? How do I serve, Bridgeview, right? How do I serve these communities effectively so that I'm so powerful in creating a pilot program that serves the needs of young people, elders, old folks, people that are suffering, whatever. I do that so well that then it becomes a pilot and crafts a distinct Muslim message instead of just regurgitating. Now, of course, we have allyship and partnerships. We have a great example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Sahih Bukhari. When he went to make Umrah, his camel stops. He points at Mecca. That's when the people of Mecca, وَهَمَّ بِقَتْلِ, Allah says they wanted to kill him. And he said, those people in Mecca, if they ask me to join family ties, to work for the ma'ruf, the good, or to establish something sacred to God, I will cooperate with them. Ibn Qayyim writes in Zad al-Ma'ad, this is a license for Muslims to work with anyone across the spectrum as long as it doesn't compromise their religious values. And this is the last point. It's okay to have non-negotiables. It's okay to say, for example, I don't think anyone should negotiate the occupation of Palestine. That's off the table. You can say that. I don't think anyone should negotiate what's happening in Kashmir. I don't think anyone should negotiate on the prison industrial complex or climate change. So it's okay. And that doesn't make you left or right. That makes you a person that has principles, and people respect this. But if I'm just in the room and I have no asks, and one time I had a community organizer in Boston tell me, Muslims are strange. I said, why? She said, they have no asks. They're just happy to be in the room. And she said, you should tell them nobody respects people who don't have non-negotiables. So one of the powers of a post-9/11 America, and then there's an article I think it came out today in Newsweek that said, this century is going to be historically considered like one of the most catastrophic centuries in the history of Islam. Because we have been pummeled by imperialism, wrecked by colonialism. We see dictators being supported by those same neoliberals who smile in our face and say, here, have a turmeric latte. Obama failed the Muslim community. Let's just admit it. If you don't believe me, ask black Muslims. If you don't believe me, ask people in Afghanistan that had bombs dropped on their weddings. If you don't believe me, ask the Egyptians. I was there when Obama gave his speech in Jamiat al-Qahira. I went to take my exam in Azhar. They were like, ما فيش امتحان علشان Obama موجود. فخذ التحفتين بنعناع واشرب الشاي واستمع. They were smoking hookah and drinking coffee in front of the gate. And I said, what happened? I studied for my exam. They said, where are you from? I said, Obamastan. And I remember the hope I saw in the eyes of Egyptians when I was there for the real Thawra. And who supported Sisi? Which is ISIS backwards. Who supported him? Saudi Arabia. We shouldn't be going to Umrah and Hajj if we already made Umrah and Hajj. You know why? For Yemenis. Number two, the UAE. The UAE. No one should go to Dubai. Why would you go to Dubai? And I say that. And watch, I'm going to be attacked now, but I don't care. It's happened before. Nick Cannons all around us. Why would a Muslim be proud to go to Dubai? They have prostitution, they have sexual trafficking, they have all this stuff that's happening. Why would you go there? Why would you give them your money? Go to countries where people are underserved and give them your money. Let's go to those places, not to these places. But also here, there was silence as Egyptians were slaughtered in Rabah. So don't we have a unique political agenda? Instead of just regurgitating things? And then you look at young Muslims. 4% of the American population is gay, I understand it. There are certain things we can align with them on, we work with them, but other things that are non-negotiable. But where's the passion for serving young Muslims? Like if we spent our passion on that, and that's one of the tricks as I finish, sorry, that I'm worried about a Trump age. If you look on Facebook, I'm not on Facebook very much, because if you're online, you're off life, and I got babies. And my wife will kill me. She's Lebanese, you know how it is. MashaAllah. And I want that zata, you know what I'm saying? But all Muslims talk about now is politics. What happened to God? What happened to tafsir? What happened to hadith? What happened to Arabic language? We become a reflection again of what America's worried about. America is caught up in this political stuff that she said. No doubt politics are important. I'm not saying neglect it. But go back and look at your Facebook wall today. Your Facebook wall is a tafsir of who you are. Make sure that you balance it with a little Qala Allah, Qala Rasulullah. Because one thing that she hit on that's very important is that the prophetic activism and the Sahaba and Tabi'een, their activism was never untethered from the centrality of revelation. One of the biggest fitnas of Trump is we think about him all the time. I don't want to think about Donald Trump. Ask people in New York, you like Donald Trump? You're going to get an earful. But I want to think about other things. And I want to make sure that my concerns are aligned strategically with what really is plaguing the Muslim community. For example, mental health services, right? People that are struggling. The convert services that were asked about earlier. We heard earlier, these are all symptoms, these questions. It's hard to study as a woman. Why haven't our nonprofits hired sheikhat to teach women full time? That's, for me, as a man with 2 daughters, that's more important than us theorizing about a community that's not really impacting us to that degree. I would say there's a bigger problem with heterosexual zina in the Muslim community than homosexuality. How do you remedy that? Let's talk about making marriage easier for our young people. Like, that's a simple thing. So, as I finish, and I apologize, forgive me. But we get caught up in this meta-theoretical stuff. We live in a cloud. My activism is in a cloud. If I know that I live in a city and the incarceration rate of young Muslims is 3 to 4%, I don't have time to theorize about stuff. If I know that a Muslim community is being gentrified, am I going to partner with others to fight for fair housing in that neighborhood? Or am I going to sit around here and be Nick Cannon and people all day long? That's my point. We have to be very careful of the media, popular culture, whatever's out there, because it tries to create and construct what should be important to you. But what's important to us is unique. So go back to what I said. Look at Muslim activists on the right and left, and I love them all, except for the Nick Cannons. And I appreciate the great work of Ilhan and Linda and Rashida. Even if I don't agree with everything they do, man, them sisters are slaying. In spite of Nick Cannon. But if you look at predominantly Muslim activism, whether on the left or the right, is just regurgitating what white America is telling them is important. It's not unique. Linda's unique. And the second thing is, go and look at your Facebook wall. It's going to tell you a lot about yourself, man. What's important? My wife's Facebook wall, just my daughter. Right? That's it. Private. But it's there. Right? But go look at that Facebook wall. See who you are. It's a tafsir of your that. فَجَزَاكَ اللَّهُ خَيْرًا.